All right, well, we're going to change gears a little bit and talk about student eligibility. So we talked a little bit about some system issues and things that you would focus on with FAA Access, our website at IFAP. We have some other system discussions later this afternoon. But you, in financial aid, especially newer to financial aid, one of the things and challenges you're going to have is you're going to have students and families coming to you, and you're going to have to sometimes not always tell them good news. Sometimes you're going to actually have to let them know they are not eligible for certain types of federal Title IV aid that maybe they thought they would be. So before we get into the session, I have a question to ask you. From your wealth of experience, who here is pretty new to financial aid? All right, let's see who's the newest. How about a couple of months? Raise your hands, a couple of months. How many? Or how long? 4 months. Who can beat 4 months? Yes? Days. Days, right here. All right. So we hope we see them by the end of the week, right? I tell people it takes about 2 years to get comfortable with Title IV aid, so you've got some time. So don't get scared by everything we're throwing at you. But based upon your different experiences here and working with financial aid, I have a question. What are the different requirements that you can think of that would impact a student's eligibility for Title IV aid? Just what are some things that come off the top of your head? And my colleague Holly is going to jot some of our thoughts down. Just raise your hand. Yes? Financial. So there's some financial aspects to being eligible for Title IV aid. High school diploma. What else comes to mind? Household size, number in college, so information from the FAFSA form. Yes? Bachelor's or no bachelor's, depending on the potential program. SAP, he just called me I'm a SAP. What was that? SAP. Satisfactory academic progress. Other things that you've come across that might impact eligibility. I'm sorry? Criminal history. What else might you think? Citizenship. She stole your idea. Anything else come to mind that might impact student eligibility? Loan limits. Pell LEU, which is lifetime eligibility use. Yes? Verification. SULA.
Oh, I'm impressed. You knew SULA.
Yeah, that's a good group. Timelines can impact. Unusual enrollment history. Are you sure you're in the right room? I thought this was new FAAs. You guys are pretty good. Anything else comes to mind? All right, my colleagues are going to pass out a checklist where we've captured the majority of the main student eligibility requirements. We're going to see how close we got on those lists. In particular, on top of this checklist, we do have some resources. So one thing you're going to find out in Title IV aid administration is just the constant studying that you're going to have to do, right? Reading our resources, staying up on changes, reviewing our manuals and procedures and so forth. So we do have some resources at the very top of our checklist. We then have the various student eligibility factors that can impact our students' access to Title IV aid. Okay, we have regulations cited after each one because I'm going to pique your interest. You're going to get excited about student eligibility, and you're going to want to learn more about it. I can't train on everything about student eligibility in the time I have, so we're going to have to make sure that we continue that studying outside the room. Raise your hand if you do not have a checklist yet. Everyone has a checklist. All right, good job. So we want to see how close we got on our flip chart with some of our information. So first and foremost, the student has to be a regular student enrolled in an eligible Title IV program at an eligible school. We didn't mention that, but that's sort of the foundation. What's a regular student? A regular student is one enrolled for the purposes of seeking a certificate or degree. Hence, for the most part, they must be in a program of study. For the most part, we can't pay students to just take courses for the sake of taking courses. And when they choose to take a course that's not part of their program of study, most of the time we can't pay for that. Right? So we need to have a way on our campus to know what courses are part of their program and what are not. Now, with everything, there are exceptions. Take a look at this checklist and see some of those sub-bullets under that first main bullet. We see there's some exceptions for preparatory coursework, teacher cert, remedial coursework. One thing you're going to learn, and with new financial aid folks, we focus on the actual main rules and regulations. But as you get more experienced, you start to realize that for every rule, a lot of times there's more exceptions. Right? So as you get more experience, we also have to know what those exceptions are and how to apply them appropriately. All right? So we need to keep that in mind for our students. Are they in an eligible program? Not every program on your campus is Title IV eligible. Right? That's something to think about as well. Second one talks about a student not being enrolled in elementary or secondary school. Does anybody have a dual enrollment program where you have students in high school going to college? Keep your hands up. All right, so you got the dual enrollment. How many of you pay Title IV aid to those students still in high school? Keep your hands up high. We have a special list we need you to sign. We have a different session for you. Right. We're not paying high school students Title IV. Now, sometimes we have some experimental sites where some schools may have an opportunity to do that, but that is a special exception. For the most part, our schools should not be doing that. So we need to know on campus, is the student still a high school student or not, right? And how do we work with those students? So that can be an issue at times. Jody talked about the FAFSA a little bit, some of that process through FAA. In general, that's the foundation, right? To even begin discussions around student eligibility, I, as a student, must fill out a FAFSA form. I've got to start that process, right? I've got to sign that statement of educational purpose, right? I want financial aid. I'm going to use it appropriately, right? So there's different ways that students can go about doing that. We did mention citizenship. Good job. An eligible non-citizenship, another piece. Because Title IV aid can go to not just U.S. citizens, but eligible non-citizens. We actually have an activity that will talk a little bit about that. I have to have a valid Social Security number. Does the parent have to have a valid Social Security number for a student to receive Title IV aid? Whoa, that was a big no. You've had that before. The answer is no. Parents' eligibility does not impact the student's eligibility. Remember, who's getting the Title IV aid? The student. Now, the parent may not be able to get a PLUS loan, right? So some of their aid might get affected from a parent standpoint, but it's the student who is applying for the financial aid. And yes, someone who doesn't have a Social Security number can still fill out the FAFSA form. We have parents from foreign countries that don't have a U.S. Social Security number, right? So they're not going to have one to fill out. But yes, the person obtaining the aid does need to have a valid Social Security number. There are a few exceptions with our students from some of our Pacific Islands that actually have a pseudo Social Security number. We won't get into that, but there is a process there. We didn't mention selective service. That's a key, right? Who has to ensure that they've registered for selective service between the ages of 18 and 25? People assign the sex of male at birth. This can be a sensitive issue sometimes on campus. We need to separate out the subjective, the nature of some of those issues that come up and just stay objective. It is the law, right? To receive Title IV aid, this is what you must be. This is what our Higher Education Act specifies, okay? And yes, that's important. And through the FAFSA process, if they're between those ages, we can actually register them for selective service for them. We did mention high school diploma. Is that the only thing I have to have, a high school diploma? If I don't have a high school diploma, I'm out of luck? There are alternatives, and we'll talk about that in one of our activities as well. Someone did mention criminal activity, which this could tie into. I can't be convicted of a drug offense, possession or sale of drugs, while enrolled in school and receiving Title IV aid. Okay. A lot of this information you're seeing we capture through the FAFSA process. That application is extremely important. We're gathering a lot of this data. Now, this type of information is something you're going to obtain through self-reporting. Right? Typically, it's the student who is going to, unless you happen to know the family. Maybe you read a newspaper article. You said, oh, look, there's my student. We need to have a conversation. Right? Also, we mentioned a couple of these as well. The student does not have a defaulted student loan, overpayments. They haven't exceeded their annual limits or aggregate limits for different types of Title IV aid, right? Subject to a judgment lien for debt owed or conviction of Title IV fraud. Verification we mentioned. Yes, if they're selected and they're required to go through verification to receive certain types of Title IV aid, subsidized aid, verification must be completed. Now, on a lot of these different bullets, we could spend a whole session just on those topics. And hopefully at the end of this training, Holly will inform you of certain sessions that may help you and you can go to get more information on these. If you have conflicting information, discrepancies in the data that can impact student eligibility, we need to resolve those before we can provide Title IV aid. Professional judgment can come into play. We don't often think about with student eligibility, but if you modify a component for that student, it can change their access to certain types of Title IV aid. So in a way, it does impact student eligibility. If you follow your professional judgment policy and determine changes are warranted and you make those changes, right, their aid may be affected, their Title IV aid may be impacted. Someone mentioned SAP, good job there, satisfactory academic progress. And if that piques your interest, I'm actually doing a session at this conference, so you may see me again. And then finally, those are the ones we just talked about are more like general student eligibility requirements, and then we have program-specific requirements. So a student gets through all of those eligibility requirements and they, phew, I made it. I'm going to get Title IV aid. Wait a second. Now we got to see what Title IV program they're trying to get aid from and what are those program requirements. If you take a look at the second page of your checklist, you'll see under each of the programs, I just gave a little snapshot of some program-specific issues. And one of you did mention one of the requirements for Pell is I can't have a bachelor's. Right? So that can impact student aid for that. For work study, I have to have need, and we'll talk about that in a session later this morning. Okay? For direct loans, what's my enrollment status have to be? Half-time. So for each of the individual Title IV programs, sometimes there's an additional layer of eligibility they also have to meet. So we have to keep that in mind. So good job. You got a lot of those in our list, and we had some additional ones as well. Now what we'd like to do is have some group activity because we've been talking long enough. Now we get to have these wonderful colleagues you're getting to know at your different tables and work together. So what we're going to do is we're going to simply break up the room in half. So these 4 tables here are group number 1 or activity number 1. You're going to work just at your little tables, okay, with your folks. And you guys are going to have citizenship and eligible non-citizens. See, you woke up this morning and didn't know how lucky you were going to be. But then we have this side of the room that's even luckier. Because you get to talk about high school diplomas and equivalents. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. So these 5 tables here are activity 2. In your handout, you will see there are 3 questions for activity 1 and 3 questions for activity 2 for the next 10 to 12 minutes. This side of the room, work through your 3 questions at your table, working together. You must choose a spokesperson because I will call on different tables. And if you're the only male at a table, it's already been decided. I know what it's like to be male in financial aid. There's not many of us. All right. On this side of the room, you have 3 questions as well for activity 2. My colleagues will be walking around to help answer questions. If you get stumped on something, you are free to use your smart devices. If you know where to go and look up some resources, you're fine to do that. Then we will come back together and I will go through all the answers for both activities. Okay? All right, go ahead, guys. Yes, if you do need help, if you get stumped on something, let my colleagues know as they're walking around. We have a few more minutes. If you do get done at your group for your activity, if you want to start tackling the other questions for the other activity that you were not assigned, feel free to do so. We will be going over both activities. The 1-minute warning. All right, folks, let's come back together now. And I know that most of you got through your 3 questions. Some of you even started the next activity or the other activity that you were not assigned. And by all means, we know that giving you only 10 minutes or so to walk through this, there's a lot to discuss. We want to make sure that we all come away with the right answers and some understanding of these different questions. This just gives you a little flavor, especially some of my folks that have been on the job for a couple of days, some of the types of issues and questions you may get in a variety of student eligibility issues. So let's all look at activity 1, and we'll look at question 1, but I'm going to ask my 4 tables over here for some insight into citizenship and eligible non-citizenship. So we had David, who indicated on his FAFSA, we had a little screenshot here of his FAFSA, and he said, I'm a U.S. citizen. And yet he got a comment back when he filed his FAFSA that said that we couldn't determine if he was a U.S. citizen. So at this point, is David just out of luck? He gets that C code on his ICER, so he's done, right? No. So what could David potentially do to prove his U.S. citizenship? I'm going to ask the tables here to raise your hand, whoever your spokesman, and see what you thought. What could David do? What's one of the things David could do? So they said a U.S. Birth certificate. What would that birth certificate have to show? Could it be any place of birth? I have to be born in the U.S. or my Commonwealth or territories of the U.S. Don't forget some of our other places that can prove U.S. citizenship. But yes, if I have a birth certificate showing I was born in France, good for you. No Title IV based upon that. Right? We also said passport. Are there different types of passports they could get or versions of a passport? It has to be a U.S. And you can have the full passport, or you could also have what? Does anyone else know? There's a card. And that's a little tip for you. I got it for my boys when we traveled. You can't use it for certain types of travel, but you can for cruises and going to Canada and Mexico and things like that. It's very inexpensive. And so some of the families, some of the documentation to prove U.S. citizenship can be expensive, $500, $600, $700. So sometimes a $30, $40 passport card, if they can do it, may be the way to go if they're just trying to get you documentation. You mentioned one other thing? A naturalization certificate, which is something. Does any of the other tables have a different document or additional documents they might be able to provide? There's a few more out there. Yes? Yes. So we have the certificate of citizenship. And that's something that's often presented for students that are adopted from a foreign country. We do have the Child Adoption Act that allows a child who is adopted from a foreign country to become a U.S. citizen if U.S. citizens adopt the child. But adoption papers aren't going to work for our process. Along that way, when they got adopted, they should have received, and they're supposed to receive, a certificate of citizenship. Right? That's what technically proves that they're a U.S. citizen. So that is a document they would have to have. We also have some other forms for being born abroad, but they're U.S. citizens on military bases, foreign countries, State Department, etc. So yes, you can find all this wonderful information where? On IFAP, we go to the FSA Handbook, right? Volume 1, Chapter 2 becomes your best friend with citizenship and eligible non-citizenship. What this also teaches you is you can have a C code and it won't go away because we'll never match at that point with Social Security to prove a U.S. citizen. So it's okay. You can still pay them, but the documentation in the file was key for that. What would you recommend this family do to make this, or to resolve this in the future? Who should they work with? Social Security Administration, because this will impact them in the future if it's not resolved, and not just Title IV. All right, second question. Maria is an eligible non-citizen, but she was not confirmed through our matches with Department of Homeland Security, as Jody walked us through in the first session. You can see on this little screenshot there were no matches, primary or secondary. What would you, the school, typically do if Maria is saying, hey, but I am an eligible non-citizen? What would you typically start doing to work through this process for Maria? What did you guys talk about at your tables here? We skipped question 2. Who's your spokesperson? What did you guys say you would do? 3 or 2? 2. Okay. Say he wanted to skip right to 3.
Going through the DHS verification plus process, formerly the G845.
Right. So there is the G845. Now it's an electronic G845 process where the school would gather. The first thing is you're going to gather the eligible non-citizenship documentation from Maria. And then if once you review it, it appears that she is an eligible non-citizen, you're going to upload that and start the process through the SAVE system through Department of Homeland Security. And a great resource for that is on the right-hand side of IFAP. Under Information Pages, there's a section on DHS SAVE that you can use for that. Most of the eligible non-citizenship statuses will go through that process, not all of them. Yes, Holly? Oh, if there are questions. Oh, yeah, okay. Holly will walk around with the mic so we can hear all of us. And then finally, in reviewing Maria's immigration documentation, what are the different eligible non-citizenship statuses she could present to the school to even be eligible for Title IV-A? What are some of the eligible non-citizenship statuses you guys talked about at your table? How about this group here? And we have a microphone. We didn't get to question 3. That's okay.
On to question 3.
How about this table right here? It's live.
Refugees and folks granted asylum.
Asylum, asylees, and refugees, yes, those are eligible statuses. Some other statuses. That's okay. Permanent residency. Other statuses you guys talked about. Right here. Conditional residence. One of the things to think about with eligible non-citizenship is these are statuses for other than a temporary purpose. We are not about to give U.S. taxpayer money to someone who's only going to be here temporarily. That is not what it's designed for. It's designed to give people who potentially want to stay permanently in this country under these type of statuses. So not every status is going to be eligible. One of the big ones that are not eligible that you are going to see in your office is what? DACA, the Deferred Action Against Childhood Arrivals. That's a big one that we see. That is not currently eligible for Title IV aid. U visas are not, student visas are not, work visas are not. If I'm just in this country to work and it's temporary, I might work here for a year or 2, I have a Social Security card. Hey, I'm here to work. Some schools think, well, shouldn't they be able to get Title IV aid? Not if they don't meet those eligible non-citizenship statuses. So again, your best friend is going to be Chapter 2 in Volume 1 of the FSA Handbook. It's going to walk through all the different statuses. We have parolees. We have battered immigrants, human trafficking issues. Let's see, Cuban, Haitian entrants, not as common, but we have a few of those. So there are definitely a number of statuses that can be eligible. All right, let's switch over to our high school diploma and equivalent, Activity 2. Good job, Group 1. Now let's look at our Group 2. First question. Under what circumstances does the Department of Education require a school to verify a student's high school completion or equivalent? Just give me one answer, because there's a couple of them, and I want to see if we can touch some of the groups here. One answer as far as when would the department require you to verify high school? B4. B4 would be one, under verification. Something else? B5 is another one. That's 2. When else would you be required to verify? I'm sorry? The what? Right. Let's not get too... She's just making up stuff over there. All right. Verification was 1 under V4 and V5. There's some other times when the department would require a high school diploma to be reviewed in order to determine if they're eligible. That may become an issue when you get audited, but all schools have to have a policy. Write this down, because we may not have known about this. A policy to validate a high school diploma if you question the validity of the high school diploma. And that was several years ago. So when we come in as reviewers, as auditors, we're going to come in, we're going to expect to see this policy. Here we say, hey, what's that policy you have on high school diploma validity? Right? You can question it for a variety of reasons. And the last one I have is sort of a generic catch-all, conflicting information. Anytime you have something related to a high school diploma and it potentially conflicts with what you see, does he have one? Does he not have one? Right? Maybe admission shows something where he's got a high school diploma, but you have something that shows it may not be through the 12th grade, he may not have graduated. We've got a conflict. We need to resolve that. Right? So those are the times when we would require. Why did I ask the question about when the department requires you to look at it? Because there's a fallacy with our schools that says, well, the department requires us to obtain a high school diploma on each and every student that gets admitted. You've heard that before, and you may hear it from colleagues. That is not true from our perspective. We do not require that. That is not a federal rule or regulation. That is a school admission policy. And my friends, you are welcome to have that as your admissions policy. We will hold you to your policy. So be mindful of that. Denise?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Remember, if you're supposed to have written policy, you
Mike? Oh.
policy. You need a mic back. Carry your written policy. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay.
Good morning. I'm not awake. I'm sure you guys are pretty similar. You're supposed to have a written policy, as Dave mentioned, but a really important point of having that written policy is you also have to follow it. Because if somebody's looking at your policy and then looking at how you're proceeding, and they're different, you're still going to have problems.
Right. All right, let's go to question number 2. We have Michael. He checked the none of the above box on the FAFSA form. You can see it checked there. So the first question I have is he eligible for Title IV aid? Oh, you guys want to be feds. They said it depends. That's our favorite phrase in the federal government. It depends. And that is the correct answer because we don't know. It's possible. If he has no high school diploma and no equivalent, then he would not be eligible for Title IV aid. But if he is eligible, what would he have to prove to you? First of all, the question, and someone raised it here, I believe, at this table. They said, well, what if he checked it incorrectly? You are right. A lot of students, believe it or not, go so fast through this, they might check it incorrectly. If they said none of the above, but they really do have a GED or state certificate, a high school diploma, or homeschool, then they just need to check the correct box under corrections and move forward, right? And they would be eligible, right? But if they truly have none of the above, what are a couple of high school equivalents to prove? Okay, GED. What else? Showing what? A transcript showing what? Oh, from high school, you mean? Let's assume he doesn't have a high school. He really said none of the above. I don't have a high school diploma, I don't have a GED, and I am not homeschooled. Is he out of luck? What would he be able to provide to you? There are alternatives to a high school diploma. One of them is associate's degree. There are students who get associate's degree without a high school diploma. Bachelor's degree, believe it or not, if they can prove a bachelor's, they're eligible under the high school diploma. If they have a transcript that shows they have 60 semester hours or 72 quarter hours or more that can go towards a bachelor's degree at any eligible school in the country, it doesn't have to be yours, they meet the equivalent of a high school diploma. And if they also excelled in high school, they got straight A's, but it was so boring they dropped out, and you admitted them into an associate degree program or higher, they would have the equivalent of a high school diploma. I call that the Doogie-Howser rule, okay? Right? And then lastly, ability to benefit. Right? Students that were enrolled in programs as of July 1, 2012, they were grandfathered in. They could receive Title IV aid under ability to benefit under passing an ATB test or successful completion of 6 hours or 225 clock hours. Or for students that were enrolled in programs after July 1, 2012, they would have to be in a career pathway program. So some of our schools are more apt to have some ability to benefit students or not. We went through that rather quickly. There is a session on student eligibility that we'll talk about that later this week as well. And then finally, question number 3, Cassandra, our FSA University has a student, Cassandra, and they're questioning under their high school validity policy her high school of Bartnicki's High School of Basics. They'd never heard of that school before. They're a little leery. So what could they obtain to help them determine if this is a valid high school or is it a diploma mill? Right? Start with the diploma. What else might you get? Because a diploma sometimes may not be enough. I might have great certificates that print out that look really good. What else might you ask for? Transcripts. Look for the transcripts and then know what your state or that state's requirements are for high school. How many years of math, English, science, etc. When we think about a diploma mill, what do we mean? Right? This is a school, or supposedly a school, where typically there's a high fee with little or no academic activity to obtain a degree or diploma in a short period of time, right? And I know some of you have seen them. We do not have a list of ineligible high schools, okay? So if the state that the school resides in doesn't confirm or deny that that's an approved high school, that that's a recognized high school diploma, it may fall on you, the school, to make that decision, right? And the high schools do not have to be accredited necessarily to be eligible for Title IV-A, right? So accreditation often doesn't or may not help you make that decision. And what if the school's closed? And they try to get it and they can't. I don't even know where my high school diploma is if there was an issue, right? Right? We actually say in our rules, you, the school, can find alternatives. But you got to work at it. It cannot be self-certification. That's the one thing that's going to cause an issue there. So maybe you go to family members. Maybe you go to former administrators. Or I still am friends with some of my former teachers, right? Or know of them. Maybe the DD-214 or another agency actually said they had a high school diploma, right? That may help validate that. So you have some options to look for alternatives. To wrap this up, when we're talking about learning about Title IV-A, to understand that most of how you learn will be through yourself. It will be through self-study. Read, and read some more. In these settings, I love it. I hope you're starting to get to know some of the folks around you. You'll have 5,000 of your closest friends in Title IV at this conference. Develop some relationships. Work with your colleagues and potentially some mentors. If you truly are newer to financial aid, find someone with 5, 10, 15, 20 years experience that can take you under their wing. Attend training, not just here, not just our training, state associations, right? Accreditation groups, system groups, school groups that have training, right? Make sure your presidents, your owners, your administrators understand the importance of training because things will change, new things come up, you've got to stay on top of it. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I'm only worried about the schools that don't ask questions, right? You will not have a program review simply because you ask a lot of questions, I promise. We like questions because that means you care and you're trying to do it. You can quote me on that, right? And if you're new in financial aid, those that have only been here a couple of days, a couple of months, have you looked at your school's past audits for the last couple of years? Maybe a recent program review you might have had. What issues did your school face and have they been resolved so that you can make sure they don't happen again? There is no college degree in Title IV. You learn on the job, and it's a lifelong commitment, right? So I hope to see you year after year in that commitment. And that is all the time we have for this specific session. We're going to take a 10-minute break. The bathrooms, the women's is straight ahead. The men's is down the hall this way. Please look at your watch. Come back in 10 minutes, and we will continue with our discussion on needs analysis, packaging, and awarding.